So hello and welcome everyone to the daily news analysis of 15th of September 2023। तो आज की इम्पोर्टेंट हेडलाइंस जो पहले देख लेते हैं। पहला जो है लिमिट्स ऑफ आइडेंटिटी, ये पेज नंबर एडिटोरियल का सेक्शन है। डिसेंटेंगलिंग द 2030 ग्लोबल रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी टारगेट, ये भी एडिटोरियल का ही पोर्शन है। ब्रोडनिंग द फील्ड, ये भी एडिटोरियल का ही है। मैसिव हंट लॉन्च्ड फॉर एलईटी मिलिटेंट्स इन जम्मू एंड कश्मीर से अनंतनाग। पास रिपोर्ट बाय एडिटर्स गिल्ड मेइटेई बॉडी टू हाई कोर्ट। सुप्रीम कोर्ट इंफॉर्मेशन ए क्लिक अवे एज इट जॉइंस नेशनल जुडिशियल डाटा ग्रिड, पेज नंबर 15 का ये आर्टिकल है। ऑल रिपोर्टेड बर्थ डेथ्स टू बी डिजिटली रजिस्टर्ड फ्रॉम अक्टूबर 1। सभी प्रकार की बर्थ रेट एंड डेथ जो भी हो रहा है वो डिजिटली रजिस्टर अब से किया जाएगा। अक्टूबर 1 से शुरू होगा इसका जो है, ये पेज नंबर 16 का आर्टिकल है। देन PMMSY ब्रिजिंग गैप्स इन द फिशरीज सेक्टर। ओडिशा अनवेल्स स्पेशल सब्सिडी टू अट्रैक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट इन स्टील, पेज नंबर 17 का ये। देन रबर बोर्ड टू इंक्रीज एरिया अंडर रबर इन नॉर्थ ईस्ट स्टेट्स, पेज नंबर 17, ये लास्ट आर्टिकल है। तो चलिए वन बाय वन देख लेते हैं। पहला जो है लिमिट्स ऑफ आइडेंटिटी। सिविल सोसाइटी शुड स्ट्राइव टू बी नॉन पार्टीशियन टू एड पीस इन मणिपुर। One of the most disconcerting features of the ongoing ethnic strife in Manipur remains the inability of civil society representatives to rise above their ethnic affiliations and work towards peace. This is exemplified by the act of the Meira Paibi, an amorphous organism of Meitei women who have been who have in the past mobilized against armed forces and police excesses, alcoholism, drug addiction, and sexual violence in the state. During the conflict that has raged on since early May, however, the Meira Paibi has been working towards disrupting the operations of the Assam Rifles in their attempts to maintain peace, especially in the foothills. These areas called buffer zones were created to ensure that there is no further escalation for violence between arms wielding people of the two ethnic communities, but there have been violent attacks with the armed forces unable to act on time before because of disruption, allegedly by the Meira Paibi, among others. Clearly, the situation has been brought to a boil by looting the weapons by both Kuki-Jew and Meitei group and their use in the strife. But the inability of the state government and its policy and the union government deployed armed forces in maintaining peace has also been due to civil society groups supporting those engaging in violence. Some Meira Paibi representatives had, in a press conference in New Delhi on Wednesday, claimed that they do not recognize the buffer zones, calling them unconstitutional. The presence of armed forces in peacekeeping is not an ideal solution in most circumstances, but with the ethnicization of law enforcement aided by a state government that seems to have lost its legitimacy of power across ethnic divides, leading to demands for a separate administration by Koki-Jew representatives. The armed forces presence and the need for buffer zones to maintain a semblance of peace have become essential in Manipur. Civil society groups such as Meira Paibi can rise above their narrow ethnic identities to press for justice for women affected in the conflict and thus build solidarity networks that will aid the process of reconciliation. and peace building exercise. Sadly, that does not seem to be the case today. Civil society organization has wiped up the frenzy of ethnic hatred partially due to the recurring trauma from violence. As much as hy- cynical political representatives have, and this has meant that the cycle of violence has endured. History suggests that a breakthrough can only be achieved through non-partisan leadership and civic dialogue among civil society and political representatives. As things stand, for that to happen, there needs to be a credible alternative to the current leadership in the state. तो नेक्स्ट जो है डिसएंटेंगलिंग द 2030 ग्लोबल रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी टारगेट. The presidency of 28th Conference of Parties COP28 of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change UNFCCC to be held in Dubai November 30 to December 12 has called for agreement on a global target of tripling renewable energy capacity from current level by 2030. This figure appears in G20 declaration too, though only as an aspirational goal to be encouraged. There is an undoubted win-win appeal to the proposal of this easily understandable goal target. However, any serious deconstruction of this target should significantly dampen such enthusiasm. In 2021, the global installed capacity of renewable energy sources for electricity generation was 3026 gigawatt or 39% of the total capacity from all sources. In 2021, the global installed capacity renewable energy sources for electricity generation was 3026 gigawatt, that is 39% of the total capacity from all sources. In total electricity generation, however, the contribution by RES was only 28%. More than half the RE generation was from hydropower, while solar 13% and wind 23% accounted for about 36% of RE generations. That is 10% of the generation from all sources. Tripling RE capacity by 2030 implies a target of about 9,000 gigawatt, which is more than the total installed capacity from all sources in 2021. Adding about 6,000 gigawatt of RE capacity between 2022 and 2030, most of this capacity is expected to come from solar and wind. As the time for construction and operationalization of any hydro plants will typically exceed the timeline of 2030 being considered. Assuming a capacity utilization factor of 25% for solar and wind combined, more than more than is current, this implies the generation of about 13,000 TWh of electricity from RES alone. If growth in the global electricity demand is at the pre-COVID-19 decade average of 2.6, then the target of tripling RE capacity implies 38% of the total global electricity production from RES. Regionally differentiated energy needs. However, there is no such thing as global electricity demand, but only a global aggregated across countries. Electricity demand across countries is highly differentiated, and the rates of growth vary for countries at different stages of development. Electricity demand is growing far more rapidly in developing countries currently. Electricity consumption between 2010 and 2019 in China and India grew annually at 6.6% and 6.3% respectively, compared to a 0.3% decline in the European Union and a minimal 0.12% growth in the United States. It is evident that any substantial RE addition in the EU and the US must come from an accelerated phase out of their fossil fuel use by 2030. Currently, only 21% of the electricity in the US and 37% in the European Union comes from RES including hydro and biomass. If the US does not phase out its existing fossil fuel capacity, it will need only about 26 gigawatt of new RE capacity to meet additional demand, and its share of tripling target of an additional 6,000 gigawatt by 2030 would be only a measly 0.4%. At the same time, since India would need about 717 gigawatt of RE capacity to meet additional demand, its share of tripling target would be 12%. On the other hand, if all the fuel based electricity production of the US and the EU is phased out, they would need to add about 1565 gigawatt and 538 gigawatt of additional RE capacity respectively. Again, assuming current rates of electricity demand growth and a capacity utilization factor of 25% for wind and solar combined. In the second scenario, with a full phase out of fossil fuel based capacity, the US and the EU would account for more than a third of the new capacity, closer to their fair share of the burden. This would also allow developing countries a less onerous transition in the energy sector without the North appropriating even the merged remaining carbon budget with their still considerable fossil fuel capacity. The opaque origin of the global RE target. Unfortunately, the COP28 call for RE global target comes with a severe lack of transparency as to its origin. What we do know is that the inspiration flows from a report of the International Renewable Energy Agency that calls for a total renewable power capacity to more than triple by 2030 compared to 2022 levels to over 11 terawatt globally. Information available on the IRENA website shows that IRENA's scenario underlying the proposed COP28 target is very close to the first highly inequitable scenario that has been sketched here. In the IRENA analysis, most of the non-RE capacity to be added by 2030 is in developing region. By 2030, 80% of the power generation capacity in sub-Saharan Africa is to be from RE sources as compared to only 70% for the European Union. The European Union and Sub-Saharan Africa are projected to add about the same amount of RE capacity by 2050. Though the non-RE capacity in the EU continues to be more than 4 times that the sub-Saharan Africa, China and India are to do much more, with India needing to exceed even the very ambitious 500 gigawatt mark by 2030. Lack of equality apart, such absolute projection of installed capacity suffer from the fundamental problem of divorcing capacity addition from growth in energy demand. IRENA itself recognizes that relative targets are inherently less risky as they are less dependent on demand growth matching expectations. Further, if the entire burden is on developing countries, this enormous increase in RE capacity is not possible without matching non-RE capacity for stability of supply and the availability of a viable storage options that are as yet nowhere near the scale envisaged by such ambitious targets. Finding the resources to build national grids adequate for their development needs at such dizzying levels of scaling up the RE capacity will pose additional challenges given in the inability to reach even the minimal annual target of $100 billion of climate financing covering all sectors. Targets for the three, but not for me. Last but not least, the most vocal proponent of this global target do not have any such a target domestically. When Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced at COP26 that India would increase its ambition to 500 gigawatt from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030, US President Joe Biden made no such promise or declare any renewable energy target, nor has the US shown any intent to declare one, apart from a general announcement not committed under the Paris Agreement to decarbonize the energy sector by 2035. The EU, too, has only a relative target, though an ambitious sounding goal of 40% of the final energy consumption from renewable sources by 2030, but certainly not absolute. For both the US and EU, these targets are essentially market signal which the government will promote but are not guaranteed by government intervention as in the developing countries. Developing countries at COP28, especially India, should consider the tripling global RE capacity target only if the North commits to absolute target domestically that are equitable and commensurate with their responsibility in an update of their nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. Then a broadening of the field. Science awards should aim to encourage more young scientists. After a delay of nearly a year, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research (CSIR) has announced winners of the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar SSB Prize with a legacy of over a half a century. The awards they comprise a cash prize, citation, and salary purse are awarded annually to scientists under 45 with outstanding work in the fields of biology, chemistry, engineering, mathematics, medicine, earth science, and physical sciences. Some of the India's most accomplished scientists have been awarded it, and it is not a stretch to say that they are akin to an Indian Nobel and fairly coveted. It was unusual than last year when CSIR did not announce awards despite the winners have already been picked before September 26, the Institute's Foundation Day, and traditionally the date on which the year's winners are announced. The background of this was the government's decision to prune prizes to scientists. There were too many awards by various ministries, thereby reducing its prestige. A Ministry of Home Affairs suggested there were plans to announce one big award akin to a Nobel Prize, but none has been announced so far. While the MHA ultimately decided to retain the SSB prizes, the government's long silence on its future did ferment concern among scientists of their likely discontinuations. Science awards, unlike those given for, say, athletics, are not meant to fate the outcome of a defined demarcated contest such as a match or a race, but are a recognition for industrious work done over time that have led to significant advances in science or technology. They are meant to encourage the winners to preserve against the uncertainty inherent in the scientific enterprise, which on average is financially less rewarding career than several other options a trained scientist could have embarked upon. This year's 12 winners are all male, with 11 from centrally funded institutions. Within these two, the winners are largely from Indian Institute of Technology. While the chosen candidates are certainly deserving, there are surely many more women and researchers from state universities who deserve recognition for their work. And so rather than reducing the number of awards, there is actually a stronger case for expanding the remit of these awards, given the government's tireless espousal of its commitment to diversity and expanding opportunities to these beyond enclaves of privileges. The success of India's Chandrayaan 3 mission demonstrates that great victories and moments of triumph are built on consistent encouragement while plodding along the dark alleys of uncertainty and failure. The next massive hunt launched for LET militants in Jammu and Kashmir's Anantnag. They were allegedly involved in the killing of two army officers and a DYSP. Heavy firing reported at the Godhol on Thursday. Two more soldiers injured while retrieving the bodies. Contact was established with the hiding militants, say officials. Security forces on Thursday intensified anti-militancy operations at Anantnag in the South Kashmir to hunt down the hiding militants behind the killing of three officers and a soldier on Wednesday. Heavy firing was reported at Godhol Hamlet in the Kokarnag area of Anantnag since Thursday morning. Official sources said a contact was established with the hiding militants whose number is between 2 and 3 in the morning when the operation resumed. Loud explosions were heard in the thick forest area where the militants are believed to be holed up and using thick foliage and undulating terrain to their advantages. Our forces persist with unwavering resolve as they encircle two elite Lashkar-e-Toiba terrorists, including Uzair Khan, a police spokesperson said. Sources said security forces were using drones and helicopters to maintain a vigil of the encounter site. Additional troops were also rushed to fortify the cordon in the area. Colonel Manpreet Singh, Major Ashish Dhonchok, Deputy Superintendent of Police Humayun Bhatt, and rifleman Ravi Kumar were killed on Wednesday in an ambush led by the militants. Hundreds of locals participated in the last rites of Bhatt on Wednesday night. Official sources said the officers who got injured during the gun battle could not be evacuated immediately from the site due to the position held by the militants in the area. A Srinagar-based army spokesperson said two more soldiers were injured in the Anantnag operation while retrieving the bodies of Colonel Singh and Major Dhunchak. Through specialized operation in the treacherous terrain. In the ensuing operation, two more personnel have been injured. The operation is still under process. The army said in the operation on Wednesday was launched based on leads obtained during the search of a village. It was ascertained that the terrorists were in a hideout in the higher reaches above the village, which was covered with dense forest and undergrowth, the army said. The next you have Quash report by Editors Guild Mettey body to High Court. The PIL also requested for directions barring use of the said report by any authority or agency. Journalist unions based in the Imphal had said the report was riddled with misrepresentations. The Manipur High Court has now admitted a public interest litigation or PIL filed by the International Metis Forum (IMF) that seeks to quash the fact-finding report published by the Editors Guild of India on the ethnic violence in the state. The PIL also requested for direction barring the use of the said report by any authority or agency looking into the conflict, alleging a nexus between the EGI and a narco-terrorist group. A bench of acting Chief Justice M.V. Muralidharan and Justice Ahanthem Bimol Singh on Bimol Singh on Thursday admitted the PIL and issued notices to all respondents posting the matters for next hearing on October 12. The EGI and its members have been given 4 weeks to file their response even as Deputy Solicitor General accepted the notice on behalf of the Union and the state government. The IMF, which has filed various PILs in the Manipur High Court since the ethnic conflict began in its most recent one, has marked the center, the state government, the Editor Guild of India, the All Manipur Working Journalist Union AMWJU, and the three members of the EGI who visited the state for their report. The report was published by the EGI on September 2 after it is sent a team to look into a complaint from the Indian Army about misinformation being spread in the state. The report concluded that the Meitei dominant press in Imphal had allegedly fanned the ethnic violence by publishing misinformation that favored the Meitei community. It drew sharp reaction from journalist union based in Imphal who said that the report was riddled with misrepresentations. An FIR was also registered against members of the EGI by the Manipur police based on the complaint of a social worker. Chief Minister N. Biren Singh called the report one-sided. While the EGI has already approached the Supreme Court for protection in this affair, the IMF has now approached the High Court with a plea to stop the report from being cited or used in any inquiries related to ethnic classes. The IMF, in their petition, pointed towards six instances of alleged false and baseless information in the EGI report, one of which was admitted by the EGI as an error in captioning an image. The next is Supreme Court information a click away as it is joins National Judicial Data Grid. Real-time data on filing and disposal of cases in the Supreme Court will now be available at the fingertips of the common man, just a click of a mouse away. Chief Justice of India D.Y. Chandrachud announced the onboarding of the Supreme Court on the National Judicial Data Grid NJDG in open court on Thursday. The NJDG portal is an national repository of data relating to cases instituted pending and disposed of by the courts across the length and breadth of the country. The onboarding of the Supreme Court's case data on NJDG is based on the open data policy. Now our data will be uploaded on the NJDG on a real-time and daily basis. At the click of a button, you can get information about the institution, disposal, and pendency of cases type-wise, year-wise, and state-wise, and quorum-wise. Chief Justice Chandrachud explained. Besides, onboarding on the NJDG would mean for the judiciary increased coordination, informed decision making, optimum deployment of resources and manpower, single source of data, and a huge potential for high quality research work. The Chief Justice said the information available on the NJDJ SCI Supreme Court of India portal would include the current pendency of civil and criminal cases, filing and disposal of cases in the previous month, number of cases pending before 3 judge, 5 judge, and even 9 judge benches. Case pending so far 2023 has seen total pendency of 64,854 registered cases and 15,490 unregistered cases yet to be cleared by the registry. In the top court, the Supreme Court page on NJDG shows that 583 3 judge bench matters, 288 5 judge bench cases, 21 7 judge bench, and 135 all of them civil. 9 judge bench reference are pending. The cases filed in August in the Supreme Court amount to 5,412 and those disposed of last month were 5,033. The Chief Justice said he would be forming more special 3 judge benches to clear pending cases. All reported birth death to be digitally registered from October 1. They will be registered on the center's portal. Amended law paves way for use of birth certificate as single document for various services. All reported births and deaths in the country will be digitally registered on the center's portal from October 1 according to a government notification. The Registration of Birth and Death Amendment Act 2023 that paves the way for digital birth certificate will come into effect from October 1. The digital birth certificate will be a single document to be used for admission to educational institution, applications for driving license, government jobs, passport or Aadhaar card, voter enrollment and registration of marriage and others. In exercise of the power conferred by the subsection of Section 1 of the Registration of Birth and Deaths Amendment Act 2023 20 of 2023, the central government hereby appoints the first day of October 2023 as the date on which the provisions of the said act shall come into force, said a notification by Registrar General and Census Commissioner Mrutyunjay Kumar Narayan. The centralized database will also update the National Population Register (NPR) registration card, property registration and electoral roll. The NPR first compiled the 2010 and updated in 2015 through door-to-door enumeration already has a database of 119 crore residents. The NPR is the first step to the creation of National Register of Citizens (NRC) as per the Citizenship Act. It will be compulsory for the state to register births and deaths on the center's civil registration system CRS portal and share data with the RGI with functions under the Union Ministry. The Act authorizes the government to collect Aadhaar numbers of parents and informant if available in case of birth registration. Currently, a parent voluntarily provides Aadhaar number for a newborn's birth certificate generated through the CRS as on March 31. The Aadhaar has a saturation of 93% for a projected projected population of 138.72 crore. The next is PMSY bridging gaps in the fisheries sector. In the fisheries sector. In 2020, when the Indian fisheries sector was preparing for a big leap due to the reforms initiated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who understood the immense potential of a blue economy and initiated systematic development of the sector, including carving out a fisheries ministry, the COVID-19 pandemic threatened to halt the progress. However, the PM turned this crisis into an opportunity by announcing the Atmanirbhar Bharat package for the fisheries sector. A significant sum of 20,050 crore was allocated for the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana (PMMSY) in 2020, committing the biggest ever investment in the history of Indian fisheries. Thanks to the Thanks to this fresh chunk of investment and focused attention, the PMSY began to address critical gaps in the fisheries value chain from fish production, productivity and quality to technology, post-harvest infrastructure and marketing. It identifies key strategy priority areas: marine fisheries, inland fisheries, fishermen welfare infrastructures, and post-harvest management, cold water fisheries, ornaments fisheries, aquatic health management, and seaweed cultivation, among others. As it completes three years, the PMMSY has successfully pulled inland fisheries from traditional waters and infused technology, inspiring many talented and enterprising youth to venture into fisheries. Today, young women entrepreneurs from the Kashmir Valley are efficiently rearing cold water rainbow trout using a recirculatory aquaculture system. Aquapreneurs in Nellore have become successful exporters thanks to biofloc cultivated shrimps The PMMSY has also helped the expand fisheries to non-traditional areas. Almost 20,000 hectares of fresh pond area is being brought under inland aquaculture, and even in landlocked Haryana and Rajasthan, farmers are successfully converting their saline waste lands into wealth lands through aquaculture. The PMMSY has empowered fisherwomen to explore remunerative options and alternative livelihoods such as ornamental fisheries, pearl culture, seaweed cultivation. A recently launched 127 crore seaweed park in Tamil Nadu's Ramanathapuram district is a truly pioneering step by the Modi government. The PMMSY has enabled 900 fish fish feed plants and 755 hectares hatcheries, and is supporting research in genetic improvement of Indian white shrimp at Chennai, the development of a specific pathogen-free broodstock, and domestication of tiger shrimp in the Andaman Island. India is now counted among the world's top three countries in fish and aquaculture production, and is also biggest shrimp exporter in the world. The government has recently announced investment of 6,000 crore as a sub scheme under the PMMSY, taking total investment into fisheries to more than 38,500 crore over the last 9 years. As the developmental partnership between fishermen and government gets stronger to harness the potential of blue economy, I wish Matini icon turned politician M.G. Ramachandran, who portrayed the lives of fishing community in the film Podagoti, was alive today, he would have definitely been happy to see how Prime Minister Modi, with his sincere effort and clear vision, has been ably addressing the concerns of fishermen and supporting them on the path of development through the mantra of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, and Sabka Prayas. This is an edited and abridged version of an article by the author. Then next you have Odisha unveils special subsidy to attract investment in steel. The Odisha government has unveiled a subsidy scheme to attract investment and boost the state's stainless steel production. The scheme offers 20% capital investment subsidy and electricity duty exemption, besides land allocation and employees provident fund reimbursement. Announcing the scheme at the Global Stainless Steel Expo 2023 GSSE 2023 in Mumbai, Mr. Hemant Sharma, Odisha's industry secretary, said Odisha is making significant contribution to the stainless steel sector and the mineral sector, being the largest producer of the iron ore and bauxite in India. Is indeed a noteworthy achievement. These positions the state as a critical player in the raw material supply chain for various industries including steel and aluminium. Mr. Sharma said Jindal Stainless Limited proposed plant expansion to 3.2 MTPA in Odisha would be a game changer. This investment represents a substantial commitment to the stainless steel sector in state, he added. Demand to rise. The demand for stainless steel in India is expected to grow at an average of 10% annually over the next few financial years, doubling the growth rate of 4.5% in the last 5 financial years, observed Anita Raghunath, director of Virgo Communications and Exhibitions, the organizer of the event. Then आज का लास्ट जो आर्टिकल है, rubber board to increase area under rubber in northeast states. In northeast states, the rubber board, jointly with the central government and the automotive tire manufacturer association, is implementing a project to expand the area under natural rubber in the northeastern states. Executive Director of Rubber Board M. Vasantha Vasanthagesan told the Hindu on Wednesday in Kurnool that of the 8.5 lakh hectare under the rubber in the country, almost 5 lakh hectares was in Kerala and Kanyakumari district of Tamil Nadu, and 1 lakh hectare was in Tripura. In a move to expand the area in the north non-traditional state, the rubber board was implementing a project to bring 2 lakh hectares under natural rubber in the northeastern states except Sikkim, but including West Bengal, the tire manufacturers who were main consumer of rubber were investing 1000 crore in the 5-year project that commenced in 2021. The potential in these states were for 4 lakh hectares. He added, considering challenges such as landslides, it was decided to plant rubber on 2 lakh hectares. Almost 27,000 hectares was covered last financial year, and about 40,000 hectares would be covered this year. In the next 2 years, the remaining areas would be brought under rubber cultivation. The project was expected to bring in socio-economic benefit, and states such as Chhattisgarh were also evincing interest in rubber cultivation. Mr. Basanthage added. So this is all for today, and we will meet from tomorrow onwards with the Hindu newspaper analysis. So thank you all. Thank you.